September 1st, 1939. The world as we know it is about to end. It began as a low rumble on the horizon, a tremor felt in the pre-dawn stillness of a Warsaw morning. For most, it was a sound easily dismissed. But for the soldiers on the border, for the pilots scrambling to their obsolete aircraft, and for a world holding its breath, it was the sound of a promise being broken, a border being erased, and a nightmare being unleashed. This was the day that Germany, a nation rebuilt on a foundation of resentment and fueled by a fanatical ideology, would plunge the continent into a new age of fire and steel. This is the story of the invasion of Poland, the campaign that is often considered the start of the Second World War. But it was more than just the first battle. It was a brutal dress rehearsal for a new, terrifying form of warfare. It was the story of a nation caught between two voracious, totalitarian empires. And it was the story of a secret, cynical deal, a devil's pact signed in Moscow that gave Hitler the green light to ignite a conflict that would consume the globe. This is the story of the day the world went to war. The Polish Second Republic was a nation born from the ashes of the First World War, an independent state resurrected in 1918 after more than a century of being partitioned by its powerful neighbors. Its borders were a source of constant tension. In the West, the Treaty of Versailles had carved out territory from a defeated Germany, creating the controversial Polish corridor to the sea and the free city of Danzig, though violent clashes in some former German regions continued until 1921. In the East, its border was drawn in blood, the result of a bitter and brutal war against the newly formed Soviet Russia that also ended in 1921. Poland was a nation caught in a geographic vice, wedged between two powerful, revisionist states that both viewed it as an illegitimate creation of a Versailles system they deeply resented, and both maintained claims on its territory. Even so, in the fragile peace of the 1930s, Warsaw desperately tried to maintain a balance, signing non-aggression pacts with Moscow in 1932 and, surprisingly, with Berlin in 1934. But these treaties were a thin veil masking the predatory intentions of Poland's neighbors. The German dictator, Adolf Hitler, had long viewed imperial expansion to the east, the acquisition of Lebensraum, or living space for the German people, as his ultimate destiny. He and many other Germans seethed with resentment over the land ceded to Poland in 1919 and were determined to reclaim it. The Soviet dictator, Joseph Stalin's intentions were the subject of some debate. Some historians argue he wanted to reconquer the lost lands of the Tsarist Empire. Others that he wanted to extend the Soviet border as far to the west as possible as a security buffer, or even that he was just looking to seize any territory at all if given the chance. Regardless, the Soviet regime viewed Poles as an enemy, and they particularly targeted ethnic Poles living within the USSR during the Great Terror of 1937 to 1938. The breaking point came in 1938. After Germany annexed part of Czechoslovakia with the blessing of Britain and France at the Munich Conference, the Polish government also took a small piece of Czechoslovakia with German consent. Warsaw had long considered a war with the USSR to be the most likely threat. But after Munich, Germany set its sights firmly on Poland. The German foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, began to aggressively push for a solution to what he called the German-Polish question, including German claims on the free city of Danzig, a formerly German port now overseen by the League of Nations and administered by Poland. Berlin also accused Warsaw of disrupting agreed-upon German access to its exclave province of East Prussia, while local German Nazis in Danzig caused constant unrest. The semi-authoritarian Polish government, led by Prime Minister Felicjan Składkowski, looked to its allies, France and Britain, who, finally awakened to the reality of Hitler's endless ambitions, promised to support the Poles if Germany attacked. As war seemed imminent in the summer of 1939, the Polish military commander, Marshal Edward Riggs-Zygmunt, was defiant. "We want to exhaust all possible efforts for a peaceful solution to the Danzig question. But if Germany insists on its annexation plan, Poland will fight, even if alone and without allies. The entire nation, to the last man and woman, is ready to fight for Poland's independence. And if we say we are going to war because of Danzig, it is a fight for our independence." Hitler didn't believe Britain and France would keep their word, but he could not risk a two-front war. So, in a move of stunning, cynical hypocrisy, he turned to his sworn ideological enemy. Even though the Nazis and the Soviets were bitter foes from the opposite ends of the political spectrum, they shared a common goal: to shatter the existing order in Europe and expand their empires. On August 23, 1939, they shocked the world by signing a non-aggression pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But it was the pact's secret protocol that was the true death warrant for Poland. In it, the two dictatorships calmly agreed to carve up Eastern Europe between them into spheres of influence. Germany could do as it liked in Western Poland and Lithuania, while the USSR had free reign in Finland, Estonia, Latvia, and Eastern Poland. The stage was set for war. In the final days of August, the Germans staged a series of clumsy, almost farcical false flag incidents to provide a pretext for their invasion. SS men under the command of the infamous Reinhard Heydrich, dressed in Polish uniforms, launched a series of attacks on German soil, including a raid on a radio station at Gleiwitz. They brought with them prisoners from the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, whom they dressed in Polish uniforms, murdered, and photographed as proof of Polish aggression. The German plan, Fall Weiss or Case White, was a massive pincer movement. 2 German armies would strike from the north and 3 from the south, aiming to encircle and annihilate the main Polish forces west of the Vistula River before they could retreat. To carry this out, the Germans assembled a formidable force of 1.5 million men, 3,200 armored vehicles, and 2,000 aircraft. But this army was not yet the unstoppable Blitzkrieg machine of legend. Most of its 2,000 tanks were light Panzer Is and IIs, or Czech models. Only 300 were the more modern Panzer IIIs and IVs. And of its 50 divisions, only 6 were armored and 4 motorized. The rest were still reliant on horse-drawn transport. 3 Slovak divisions would also join the attack. Opposing this force were about 1 million Polish soldiers in 38 infantry divisions, 1 motorized brigade, and 11 cavalry brigades. They had 1,100 armored vehicles, but nearly all were small or outdated models. They lacked modern anti-tank weapons, and their air force was weak, with about 750 older aircraft. At the urging of their nervous allies, the Poles had delayed their full mobilization for fear of provoking Hitler, meaning that on September 1st, only about half of their units were in their assigned defensive positions. The Polish High Command had made a fateful, difficult choice. Instead of concentrating their forces for a defense in depth, they chose to defend the entire border, hoping to resist long enough for their French allies to launch a promised relief offensive 15 days after French mobilization. On the morning of September 1st, Hitler, citing his fabricated provocations, falsely accused the Polish army of firing onto German territory and announced that Germany was returning fire. As German forces streamed across the border, the world was introduced to a new, terrifying form of warfare. The panzer divisions, supported by shrieking Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers, punched through the thin Polish lines, penetrating deep into the rear to surround and isolate the slower Polish infantry. The Luftwaffe didn't just hit military targets, It deliberately bombed Polish cities to terrorize the civilian population. One of the first shots of the war was fired by the German battleship Schleswig-Holstein, which, under the guise of a friendship cruise, had positioned itself to bombard the Polish garrison on the Westerplatte Peninsula. The surprised garrison of just 180 Polish troops resisted furiously for 7 days, a hopeless, heroic stand that became a symbol of Polish defiance. Although the Germans quickly broke through the Polish lines in many places, many Polish units resisted fiercely and held up the German advance. At the Battle of Mokra, a Polish cavalry brigade, using its anti-tank guns, held up an entire German panzer division for a full day. It was at another engagement, at Krojanty, that a persistent myth was born. After a Polish cavalry unit was surprised and decimated by German tanks while attacking an infantry unit, an Italian war correspondent embellished the story. German propaganda seized on it, creating the false, enduring image of Polish lancers senselessly charging German tanks with their sabers, a symbol of Polish fanaticism against German technological superiority. But for the men on the ground, the reality was one of brutal, grinding combat. As a German war correspondent reported, "This was the first Polish soldier I set eyes upon. A bloody lump of human suffering, his legs drawn to his breast in pain, his face greenish and pale. A painful smile spread across his face as he whispered the German word, 'Danke.' He died soon after." Polish command and control could not keep up with the confusion behind the lines and the rapidly changing situation at the front. The speed of the German advance shocked the Poles, and many Polish formations were trapped in pockets of varying sizes, resisting as long as they could until shortages of food and ammunition and relentless air attack forced them to surrender. As the Polish army prepared to defend the capital, on September 3rd, Britain and France finally declared war on Germany. In Warsaw, the news was met with jubilation. A resident named Helena Rugulska celebrated, "We embraced each other, kissed, hugged, and danced. Long live England! Now we won't die in this unequal fight." A few hours later, France declared war on Germany. In Warsaw, there's enthusiasm and demonstrations. But her hopes were misplaced. The promised French offensive would not come in time. The Germans took Krakow without a fight on September 6th. By the 8th, German spearheads reached the outskirts of Warsaw but were thrown back by the determined defenders. A German report reflected their difficulties. It was pointless to try to break through here. The brigade ordered a retreat. Riflemen, some of whom had panicked, blocked their path. On the tanks' hulls lay dead and wounded. The order to retreat didn't reach many of the tanks, and they were left behind. On September 9th, the Polish forces trapped in a large pocket west of Warsaw launched a massive counterattack at the Battle of the Bzura, the heaviest fighting of the campaign. Though they were ultimately defeated by relentless German pressure and air attack, their desperate assault bought precious time for the capital to prepare its defenses. As the Polish army was being systematically destroyed, their only faint hope rested on their allies. But instead of a full-scale attack on Germany's weakly defended Western Front, the French made only a limited token advance before withdrawing to the safety of their Maginot Line. Poland was alone. And then, on September 17th, the final, fatal blow was struck. The Soviet Union joined the fighting on the German side. The Germans had been asking Moscow to join since the first days of September. The Soviets had needed time to mobilize and end a border conflict with Japan, but now, fearing their new partner might not respect their secret deal, Stalin acted. The Soviets, like the Germans, created a cynical pretext, with Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov claiming the Polish state had ceased to exist and that they were moving to protect the kindred Ukrainian and Belarusian people. Two massive Red Army fronts with 470,000 men and 4,000 tanks poured across Poland's eastern border. For the Polish troops on that border, who were taken completely by surprise, the situation was bewildering. A young soldier named Janusz Bardach recalled the moment of his capture. "I couldn't imagine what Soviet soldiers were doing on Polish territory and could only hope that the mighty Red Army had come to fight the Nazis. I wanted to express my joy at seeing them, but someone ordered us to put up our hands." Some locals, especially Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Jews, did welcome the Soviets, hoping for better treatment than they had received from the Polish authorities. Fighting was limited, though Polish troops held off Soviet tanks at Grodno for 2 days, using Molotov cocktails. In a show of their newfound cooperation, German and Soviet troops held a joint victory parade in the city of Brest-Litovsk on September 22nd, complete with victory arches decorated with swastikas and red stars. The world watched in horror, but Britain and France, unwilling to risk a war with the Soviet Union as well, did nothing. British ambassador in Moscow, William Seeds, was blunt. "I do not myself see what advantage war with the Soviet Union would be to us, though it would please me personally to declare it on Mr. Molotov." As the two totalitarian powers took control of Poland, they quickly imposed a reign of terror. Since both insisted the Polish state no longer existed, they considered its citizens to have no rights. The Nazis considered Slavic Poles and Polish Jews to be Untermenschen, subhumans to be enslaved, killed, or driven away. SS Commander Reinhard Heydrich was clear. The nobles, priests, and Jews must be killed. But it wasn't just the SS that committed atrocities. Special Einsatzgruppen targeted Polish Jews and intellectuals for execution, and even regular Wehrmacht units killed Polish prisoners and civilians. Army Commander Franz Halder would later state that the Nazi leadership's intent was clear. It was the intention of the Führer and Göring to destroy and exterminate the Polish people. In the town of Częstochowa, German troops massacred about 1,000 civilians, including 150 Jews, on the false pretext that civilians were firing on them. A witness, Helena Spielmann, recalled the scene. "They thoroughly searched the Polish and Jewish men. If they found a razor blade, shaving knife, or pocket knife, the man in question was brought to a nearby air raid trench and immediately shot." In all, the Germans executed up to 15,000 Poles during the campaign. On October 4th, Hitler announced an amnesty for all Germans who had committed war crimes in Poland. The Soviets were equally brutal, shooting or imprisoning Polish community leaders, officers, and civil servants, and deporting many more to camps in the Soviet Union, executing hundreds of Polish defenders after the brief battles of Grodno and Lwów. By late September, only a few Polish pockets were still holding out. The Polish government had fled to neutral Romania. The Germans, inexperienced in urban warfare, struggled to take the heavily defended capital of Warsaw. The 180,000-man Polish garrison fought back with desperate courage. One German report described young Polish soldiers who crewed a single field gun, jumping up to fire until they were killed, only to be replaced by the next crew, destroying several German assault guns in the process. The Luftwaffe responded by relentlessly bombing the city, targeting its power stations and water systems. Civilian Halina Regulska recalled the scene. "Above us raged an inferno. One plane after another dove down onto us, and every time it seemed to us that this time we'd be hit. This expectation of death made our hearts stand still." September 25th marked the biggest aerial bombing attack in history up to that point, dropping incendiary bombs that started massive fires and killed an estimated 40,000 Warsaw residents. The mayor of Warsaw, Stefan Starzynski, broadcast desperate radio appeals to the world. "I am not asking for help. There's no time for that anymore. I demand revenge. May all broadcasters who hear us repeat to the entire world, Warsaw is fighting. Poland is not yet lost." But it was hopeless. Facing water shortages, the risk of disease, and with no hope of relief, Warsaw surrendered on September 28th. The last organized Polish units laid down their arms on October 6th. The campaign was over. The German military had suffered about 15,000 dead, a higher-than-expected cost that worried the High Command about their readiness for a war with the West. Polish losses were catastrophic, up to 120,000 soldiers killed and over 900,000 taken prisoner by both invaders. As many as 200,000 Polish civilians were dead. The horrors of the occupation, both on the German and Soviet sides, were about to begin. A new chapter of suffering for a nation that had been betrayed and erased from the map. The friendship between Hitler and Stalin, as the Soviet foreign minister would soon say, had been sealed in blood. The blood of Poland.